If you ask someone why Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, like 99% of people will give you the exact same answer.
Right, they'll say her feet were tired.
Exactly, her feet were tired. And 99% of people would be, well, completely wrong. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are looking at a truly thought-provoking document. It's titled, What a Boarder Can Learn from Rosa Parks. And our mission today is to kind of deconstruct this incredibly famous historical moment to extract a highly practical, everyday blueprint.
A blueprint for surviving and thriving in close-knit communities, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And, the document specifically focuses on the social dynamics of boarding schools. But the psychology we're pulling from it really applies to any tight-knit group you might find yourself in.
For sure. I mean, think about a boarding house for a moment. It is this intense pressure cooker ecosystem.
Oh, absolutely. You have dozens of young people eating, studying, sleeping, and socializing in the exact same building.
Yeah, it's an environment where your personal values are just constantly subjected to the crushing weight of shared peer pressure.
And even if you haven't set foot in a high school dorm in decades, you navigate those exact same group dynamics every single day.
Oh, totally. It happens in your corporate office or your neighborhood association or even just your tightest group of friends.
Right. And this deep dive is going to completely change how you view everyday courage, I think.
Because this source reframes a historical giant, really, into a highly relatable mentor for those quiet, daily moral choices we all have to make.
Yeah, we are bridging the gap between textbook civil resistance and those seemingly small decisions you make in the cafeteria or, the boardroom when everyone else is watching.
But I feel like to even begin applying those lessons, we have to clear away that central myth we just mentioned.
The tired seamstress myth.
Yes, the tired seamstress, because it fundamentally misunderstands how moral courage actually works.
Right, so let's look at the baseline facts that the source establishes. Rosa Louise Macaulay Parks was born on February 4th, 1913, in Tuskegee, Alabama, and she grew up under the systemic enforcement of Jim Crow laws.
Right.
And then on December 1st, 1955, at the age of 42, she was returning home from work. The bus driver ordered her to give up her seat to a white passenger, and she simply refused.
Which is where the myth comes in, right? Because I always learned she was just this ordinary commuter who had a long day at work, and she just finally reached a spontaneous breaking point.
A lot of people learned it that way. But the source document completely dismantles this, actually using her own words.
She was incredibly direct about the misconception, wasn't she?
She was. She said, quote, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in," unquote.
I love that quote. Tired of giving in. So if she wasn't just physically tired, what was actually happening in that moment?
Well, by the time she boarded that bus, she was a deeply experienced, highly committed civil rights organizer.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, she served as the secretary of the Montgomery branch, the NAACP. And the source points out that she actively investigated cases of racial violence.
Which, I mean, in the segregated South, traveling around to document violence against marginalized people wasn't just administrative work.
No, not at all. It was incredibly dangerous, highly volatile field work that required immense nerve.
And the source also mentions she had attended dedicated workshops, specifically focused on civil disobedience.
Right, and that is a crucial detail, because civil disobedience workshops are not just philosophy seminars, they are tactical training grounds.
Like learning the actual mechanics of nonviolent resistance?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Participants train to manage their own adrenaline, they learn to endure intense verbal abuse, and to maintain absolute composure when facing physical threats.
So it's about overriding your natural fight-or-flight response.
Yes, so you can hold a moral line without escalating the chaos. And beyond all that, she had tried to register to vote 3 separate times before finally succeeding.
In an era where taking that action carried enormous physical and economic risks.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this, because knowing her background completely shifts the paradigm here.
It really does.
If you think about, watching an Olympic athlete breaking a world record to the audience sitting up in the stands, it looks like this sudden, miraculous burst of spontaneous power, right?
Yeah, the starting gun goes off,
Yeah.
and they do the impossible in 10 seconds.
Right. It looks like magic. But what the audience isn't seeing is the thousands of hours of unseen, rigorous, deliberate training.
The early mornings, the strict diet, the injuries.
Exactly. The failures, the repetitive drills. Rosa Parks refusing to stand up was that 10-second sprint. It was a highly principled, heavily prepared act. It was not an impulse.
And what's fascinating here is the implication for you navigating your own life.
How so?
Well, if her action had just been a lucky moment of spontaneous bravery brought on by sore feet, there really isn't much of a lesson to take away, other than hoping you get tired at exactly the right historical moment.
Right, which isn't exactly actionable advice.
Exactly. But recognizing it as the culmination of years of quiet preparation proves a vital mechanism. Moral courage doesn't just happen to people.
It's a deliberate choice.
Yes, it is a muscle cultivated over time through study, community involvement, and deeply examining your own values.
Okay, but if she was so highly trained in civil resistance, and she knew she was making this massive stand, why didn't she make a scene?
What do you mean?
Well, why not use that moment on the bus to deliver a powerful speech to the other passengers? How does just sitting there quietly translate to actual power? Especially when we try to apply this to a chaotic environment like a boarding school or a busy workplace.
Because her courage was so rooted in preparation, it didn't require explosive aggression to be effective.
Okay.
Look at the specific anatomy of her actions. She didn't yell at the bus driver. She didn't seek out a physical confrontation or draw theatrical attention to herself.
She just sat still.
She simply sat still and said no, calmly, clearly, and with absolute dignity. And the source connects this behavior directly to a very specific definition of self-respect.
And how does the document define it? Because people use that term a lot.
It argues that self-respect isn't arrogance. It's knowing your own worth, completely independent of external markers like academic results, athletic achievements, or social status.
So it's internal.
Entirely. It's setting honest limits on how you are willing to be treated by others. It means taking proper responsibility for your own actions and taking genuine care of your physical, emotional, and academic well-being.
Okay, so translating that to a boarding house ecosystem, or really any social group, true courage rarely looks like a dramatic movie scene where you stand on a cafeteria table and deliver a monologue that makes everyone clap.
Yeah, that almost never happens in real life.
Right. It looks so much more ordinary. It's choosing not to join in on unkind gossip, even when staying quiet makes you the odd one out.
Exactly. Or it's speaking up when something unfair happens, even if nobody else seems to care.
It's the daily practice of making choices that reflect the person you genuinely want to be, rather than defaulting to the easiest, most socially acceptable path presented to you by the group.
Well said.
Hold on, though. I want to push back on this a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
In a high school dorm, or honestly even in corporate office politics, people are practically biologically wired to want to fit in.
Oh, absolutely. The social survival instinct is huge.
Right. So if someone is being subtly bullied or excluded and you just quietly refuse to participate, but you don't scream and shout about it,
No.
does that actually do anything?
You're wondering if it's effective.
Yeah. Feels like throwing a pebble into a hurricane. Does quiet courage really shift the dynamic?
That speaks to how we often fundamentally misunderstand power in social dynamics. Self-respect acts as a structural foundation.
Okay, how so?
When a student quietly refuses to participate in cruelty,
Yeah.
they might not be giving a speech, but they are doing something incredibly disruptive. They are breaking the social momentum of the crowd.
Breaking the momentum.
Yeah. Think of a crowd's behavior as a heavy, moving vehicle. Gossip, exclusion, unkindness. These behaviors rely entirely on unanimous complicity to keep moving forward.
Right. They need everyone in the room to nod along or laugh or at the very least look away.
Exactly. That passive validation is the fuel. The moment one person calmly opts out, they create friction. They signal to everyone else in the room that this behavior is not an undeniable consensus.
It shatters the illusion that everyone agrees.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And because their refusal is grounded in their own self-respect, they are implicitly extending that respect to the person being targeted.
They treat others the way they expect to be treated.
Right. That mechanism is what builds genuine trust within a community. It gives others in the room unspoken permission to also step back from the crowd.
So you're creating friction, which slows down the vehicle, but creating that friction isn't a magical, pain-free shield.
No, definitely not.
I mean, breaking the crowd's momentum carries a very loud, very real cost. You don't just quietly disagree and have everyone instantly applaud your integrity.
No, the pushback from the group is usually immediate, and the source is refreshingly honest about the reality of taking a stand.
Yeah, Rosa Parks' act of resistance successfully triggered the 381-day Montgomery bus boycott, which was incredible and eventually led to the Supreme Court ruling bus segregation unconstitutional.
But the personal toll was devastating.
What actually happened to her and her family? Because we don't hear about that part as much.
Well, she lost her job as a seamstress. Her husband faced severe consequences at his job. They endured sustained, terrifying harassment and death threats from their community.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The pressure and danger became so immense that they ultimately had to flee Montgomery entirely and relocate to Detroit. The cost was enormous, and it lasted for years.
And she had to have known those risks were there, given her extensive background investigating racial violence.
She understood the mechanics of retaliation better than anyone.
And she acted anyway. Now, obviously, the stakes in a modern boarding house or a neighborhood association aren't life or death in the same way, but the social cost of speaking up is terrifyingly real.
It is. The cost in a tight-knit community is the sudden loss of approval from your peers. It's temporary social isolation.
Which feels like life or death when you're a teenager.
Oh, completely. It's the stark vulnerability of being the only one to speak up when everyone else is staying safely silent. It's a heavy, awkward discomfort of standing apart from the pack.
Because when you make a choice based on your values rather than the group's comfort, the group will almost always push back to protect its own equilibrium.
Exactly right.
So what does this actually mean for you, the listener? If the cost of standing up is social exile in your dorm or becoming the outcast at your office, why should you stick your neck out?
It's a fair question.
Right. Why not just keep your head down, survive the environment, and move on with your life?
Well, the source provides an incredibly powerful warning to answer that exact question. Yes, standing up has a cost. You might face deep discomfort or lose social standing. But the cost of not acting with integrity is the slow, silent erosion of your own self-respect.
The erosion of self-respect. What does that actually look like in practice, like on a day-to-day basis?
It happens gradually. Every time you betray your own internal values to appease the crowd, you compromise a piece of yourself. Over time, if you keep making that compromise to avoid friction, you begin to rely purely on external validation because you've hollowed out your own internal foundation.
Wow. You become a chameleon, constantly adapting to whatever the room demands until you no longer trust your own character.
Exactly. You lose yourself.
Losing that internal trust, losing who you are, is a far higher and much more permanent price to pay than a few weeks of awkwardness in the dining hall or the break room.
That is the core lesson. The cost of acting with integrity is almost always worth paying because the alternative is losing yourself.
Yeah.
And when we look at how this shapes a broader community, those costly, seemingly small actions are exactly what dictate the culture around you.
The source makes a really great point here. It says boarding house cultures, or, any organizational cultures, aren't built by the rule book the management hands out on day one.
No, nobody reads the rule book and suddenly acts perfectly.
Right. They're built by the steady accumulation of daily choices.
People influence their culture when they make the active choice to include peers who feel isolated. They shape it when they respond to unkindness with fairness rather than joining in.
They build the culture when they take shared responsibilities seriously.
Exactly. Culture is built quietly through the ordinary texture of daily life.
And the ultimate payoff for taking on that social cost is immense. Diverse environments bring together incredible arrays of backgrounds, beliefs, and life experiences.
Which is what makes them so vibrant.
Yes, the diversity is a massive gift, but it requires maturity to protect it. It requires the courage to stand up for those whose experiences are less heard. When you take on that social cost, you actively reduce the conditions that allow bullying and exclusion to flourish. You help create an environment where people feel genuinely safe to be themselves.
And crucially, your own individual confidence and integrity start to grow from the inside out, rather than relying on the fickle validation of the crowd.
You build an internal fortress.
An internal fortress. I like that.
Which brings us full circle, really.
Yes.
Let's recap the core journey we've been on today. We started by dismantling a massive historical myth.
Right. Rosa Parks wasn't a physically exhausted woman who just happened to sit down because her feet hurt.
She was a meticulously prepared organizer whose deep self-respect and years of tactical training allowed her to act with calm, immovable dignity.
And her actions provide a perfect, everyday blueprint for the micro moments we all face.
Yeah, the mechanics of her courage apply directly to navigating pressure cooker environments.
It requires knowing your worth independent of the crowd, breaking the momentum of negative group behavior by simply refusing to participate.
And accepting the immediate social cost to protect your long-term character.
Exactly.
We tend to view social friction, the awkward moments, the peer pressure, the minor conflicts in the office or the dorm, as annoyances to be avoided at all costs. We just want to get through the day without rocking the boat.
But viewing them simply as annoyances might be looking through the wrong lens entirely.
Right. So we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, building on this idea of unseen preparation.
Yeah, think about this.
If Rosa Parks' defining world-altering moment was actually the result of years of quiet preparation and thousands of smaller, deliberate choices, what if the awkward, uncomfortable social frictions you are trying so hard to avoid right now aren't just annoyances?
What if they're exactly what you need?
What if the intense peer pressure in your community or the office gossip you hate dealing with are actually the exact training ground you need?
It's a powerful way to look at it.
What if those small, quiet choices to opt out of the crowd are building the muscle of courage you will need for your own defining moments? We all like to think we'd be the one to stay seated when history calls, but history doesn't just suddenly tap you on the shoulder.
No, it doesn't.
It tests you every single day in the quiet, completely ordinary moments when you think nobody else is watching.